Arahato Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today, actually, we changed the date for this week because tomorrow I have to attend some urgent work. So now today we are going to discuss about, last time we discussed about the difference between Dhamma and Dhammatas, means the realities and the phenomenon. So if you remember, we divided the phenomenon into 5 groups: Uttu Niyama, Chitta Niyama, Bija Niyama, Chitta Niyama, Kamma Niyama, and Dhamma Niyama. And so we pointed out how they are different from the realities, the Dhammas. Now today we are going to discuss how, now we had a chart of Paramattas, a complete chart where about the ultimacy of the Theravāda tradition. So now we are going to point out of the separate entities or elements of this chart, which element or which name, which thing belongs to which group. For instance, if we talk about Paramattha Dhammas, is it a Dhamma or a Dhammatā? If we talk about Paramattha Jatikas, it is a Dhamma or Dhammatā. So likewise, the entire chart we are going to distribute into 2 groups. And how should we understand it? So the idea of Dhamma and Dhammatas: Dhamma are the realities, Dhammatā are the phenomenon. It's quite important in understanding the Theravāda teachings profoundly and deeply. There may be, it is difficult, sometimes it is difficult to have a clear cut, a black and white difference, whether some parts are whether Dhammas or Dhammatas. But in the end, we'll be able to have a better picture about the constitutions of this chart of the ultimacy. So today's lecture will be focusing on naming the constitutes of the chart of ultimacy into either as Dhamma or Dhammatā. Constitutes, right? So Dhamma or Dhammatā. Components, we can say. So now we have the chart of ultimacy. We wrote it in Pali actually so far. Paramattha is divided into 2 groups: Sankata Paramattha and Asankata Paramattha. Then in Sankata we had Paramattha Dhamma, then Paramattha Jatika, then we have, I'm sorry, Uppadino Dhamma came above, but here I will move it below. Uppadino Dhamma. In the original chart, this was shift up and down. Then we have Anuppanna Dhamma. Then Asankata Paramattha group, we had 5 types of nirvana. Some nibbana. We had tadanga nibbana. Then we have vikambana nibbana. Then samucceda nibbana. Finally, nissarana nibbana. Nissarana nibbana. Then we had something in between as well. Corner we had panyati. We divide it into atta panyati. Then nam panyati. Within nama panyati, there is a special one called saddha sabhava panyati. Actually, in the previous lectures, I gave it as saddha panyati. It should be saddha sabhava panyati. Then in between, we had a list which cannot be called as panyati, which are not panyatis, but at the same time, it cannot be put into the chart of ultimacy. They were the 10 anipanna rupas. Then we have 3 universal characteristics, tilakkana. Then we had ekaccha pache sati. Certain conditional forces. Then we had something called gati, bhava, and so forth. Finally, we had ajatakasa. Kala, the time, was panyati, actually, according to Theravāda tradition. So this was the chart of ultimacy as we drew. Then we also had something above called Dhamma and Dhammatā. The difference between Dhamma and Dhammatā. Dhammatā was 5-fold, if you remember. It was Utuniyama. Then we had Bija, Niyama, and 5. Kamma Niyama, Chitta Niyama, and Dhamma Niyama. Right? All 5. So now what we are going to do is, we are not going to focus on these 5. That's why I didn't write it. So there are 5 Dhammatas, 5 types of Dhammatas. Dhammatā are phenomenon. Dhamma are reality. So now we are going to understand in this chart which elements or which names belong to Dhammas and which names belong to Dhammatā. Right? So here I shall mark the Dhammas with black color. Then Dhammatā with green color. Dhamma and Dhammatā with green color. So then we can have a better understanding about what these realities or what these components of the chart are. So if we start from the first, now these are topics. We are not going to name them. We shall start from the numbers. They all are considered as constitutes, and then Panyati is out of the story, because Panyati is neither Dhamma or neither Dhammatā. Because in this explanation, when I say Dhamma, I'm talking about a reality. But in the ultimate explanation, Panyati is also considered as a Dhamma. We can call it a Dhamma. But in this lesson, I'm going to talk Dhamma equal to realities. I exclude Panyati from here. So now this group, as we have discussed so far, are not Panyati obviously, but they are very close to Paramattha. So that's why I drew a broken line here. Here it's a complete line, because They can never be Panyati. But the Kala, then one can ask a question, why didn't we put time here? Because space and time are very related in our present day discussions, topics. So therefore I wrote Kala here, but according to the Theravāda tradition, it belongs to the Panyati. It belongs to the Panyati. So now we shall start from Paramattha Dhammas. Paramattha Dhammas are the Nama and Rupa. And Nama and Rupa. Nama is mentalities. Rupa is materiality. Twofold. So they are realities. Paramattha Dhammas. Paramattha Dhammas has the nature of arising as a separate entity. As a separate entity. Something that has arisen already is called past, arisen and passed away. Something that has arisen but not passed away is called present. Something which has arisen and passed away is called past, atita. Something which has arisen but not passed away yet is called pachuppanna. Then something which has not arisen yet, we call it anagata. We are talking about the reality that arises. When we are talking about Paramattha Dhammas, we have to explain it based on its arising. Sometimes we talk about a potency, the possibility of arising. So these are the potencies. These are the potencies. So Paramattha Dhamma are exactly realities. They are not Dhammatas. Chitta is a Paramattha Dhamma. It has the characteristic of cognizing or knowing an object. Chetasikas are Paramattas. They have their own functions. They are separate entities. Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayu are separate entities. Though we say them as separate entities, it also should be known, it should be also kept in mind that they never arise alone. They always arise in clusters. A cluster of materiality, material stuff is called Rupa Kalapa. A cluster of mentalities are called Chittupada. Chittupada and Rupa Kalapa. Whatever exists in the world exists in clusters, not alone. But even within a cluster, a single reality has its own independent existence. It means it is a separate entity, though they are connected with each other, inseparably connected. Practically, they are inseparable. But still, in terms of functioning, in terms of their characteristics, they have their own identity. Therefore, they are separate entities, we call. Though they arise in correlation with each other, in the practicality or in the actuality, they have their own existence. So they are separate entities. So all the Paramattha Dhammas are Dhammas, right? All Paramattha Dhammas are Dhammas. All Paramattha Dhammas are Dhammas. D. Dhamma. Then we come into Paramattha Jatikas. Paramattha Jatikas were the potencies that we are talking about. For instance, the lobha, uneradicated lobha, uneradicated dosa. Sometimes the habitual impact remaining in Arahant's mind stream or even a Putujjana's mind stream. We call it vasana. Sometimes we have asaya, anusaya, charita and so forth. And kamma samangita, the force of the kamma that remains after the kamma has been done. They were all discussed under Paramattha Jatika. In our original list, it was located at number 3. It is located as number 3. But here we are talking it as number 2 because it's easy to explain. That's why I shifted the places. So Paramattha Dhammas are Dhammas. Now, out of some Paramattha Dhammas, certain mentalities remain, their potency remain within our mind stream, their potency. The uneradicated defilements, the karma force that remains latent, they arise as separate entities. But while they are remaining as a potency or as potencies, they should not be designated as separate entities. But still, they can be abandoned. They can be affected by certain means. So therefore, these latent tendencies tend to be or manifest characteristics of realities rather than Dhammatas. So they are very close to Dhammas. They are very close to Dhammas. They can be said as a certain state of Dhamma, stage of Dhamma. They are a certain stage of Dhamma. So they are Dhammas. They are Dhammas. But at the same time, sometimes within the literature, we talk it as a potency, a possibility of defilements. Possibility of defilements. They can be abandoned, so they are obviously Dhammas. But sometimes we call them, they arise as the latent defilements, arise as separate entities. And they follow our mind stream like a potency, like a possibility. So therefore, within the literature, we have an explanation on them based on Dhammatā as well. Dhammatā, DHTA, Dhammatā. So we cannot rule out the idea that they are not Dhammatas. Why is that? Because they have been explained so far. So, like so. So therefore, Paramattha Jatikas manifest characteristics closer to, or they are obviously Dhammas. There's no doubt about that. But they manifest characteristics close to Dhammatas as well. Because why they are close to, why they are Dhammas? Because they can be abandoned on the spot while we attain the higher paths. Some of the kammas can be suppressed by some means. Karma cannot be eradicated actually. Only defilements can be eradicated. Kammas can be suppressed. So likewise, these Paramattha Jatikas, the latent forces, if you remember in the chart, they remain as the Avijja and Tanha and the Kamma Samang Kamma force. They can be affected. Then we are talking about Uppadino Dhamma and Anuppanna Dhamma. If you remember, if I recall, Uppadino Dhamma are the resultant mentalities and materiality that is supposed to happen by a kamma that has already gained the opportunity. Kamma cannot just give results out of nothing, or it cannot give results, just remain latent. It has to gain the opportunity to give results. So after a kamma has gained the opportunity, before it gives results, before it ripens as a result, in between these two stages, the ripening and the opportunity, gaining the opportunity, this resultant mentality and materiality that is supposed to arise, that is about to arise, is called Uppadino Dhamma. We are not talking about the reality, we are talking about the possibility or a potency that they are going to happen. So it's very closer, they are very closer to Dhammatas. They are very closer to Dhammatas because we are not talking about the potency here. We are talking about the reality that is going to happen. So it's much closer to Dhammatas. They are much closer to Dhammatas. Therefore, some teachers call them as Dhammatas directly. Now, think about the Anuppanna Dhammas. As long as the defilements are uneradicated, as long as the kamma is not being fully abandoned, lot of suffering is about to happen. We are bound with a lot of suffering. That suffering we are bound with is a certain phenomenon from which we are not being freed. So therefore, Anuppanna Dhamma, the suffering that is going to happen, is also very close to Dhammatas because they are potencies, possibilities. But at the same time, Uppadino Dhamma and Anuppanna Dhammas, for instance, if you talk about Anuppanna Dhamma is the suffering that is going to happen if the causes prevail. We are not talking about the causes. Paramattha Jatikas are rather causes or the realities, the potencies that are within us. We are talking in these two cases, we are talking about there is a potency, there are some kind of results of potencies. So those results are not found now actually. What is found is the cause. Paramattha Jatika are the cause, to the side. I'm not going to talk them as causes exactly. They are to the causal side, not to the effect side. So that's why Buddha mentioned that we have to eradicate the defilements. When the defilements are eradicated, the suffering will be removed. The karma force is there. Because of karma force, there is going to be a result. So these two are in the can be said as secondary effects of certain causes. So that's why Paramattha Jatikas are closer to Dhammas rather than Dhammatas. But we cannot just differentiate Paramattha Jatikas and Dhammas and others as Dhammatas, because according to the literature, I have to follow the literature, which explains Paramattha Jatikas are the ones that are going to arise, so forth. So and they are going to cause such results. So therefore, they have been explained as Dhammatas. So that's why I didn't give them a full credit as Dhammatas, but still there is a possibility. But when we are talking about these two, they are rather Dhammatas, closer to Dhammatas. But at the same time, their existence has been discussed. We cannot completely rule out the suffering that is going to happen, or the resultant consciousness and the materiality that is going to happen is completely not a Dhamma. For instance, this is if we draw a diagram on this, right? If you remember, so this is the chart of realities. Then we had some Paramattha Jatikas like Avijja, Tanha, Kamma, and so forth. Then when they gain the opportunity, when Kamma is gaining the opportunity, right, there are going to happen some resultant consciousness. So these resultant, after the opportunity has been gained, their possibility at this moment, their possibility was called Upadino Dhamma, not them, their possibility. And as long as these realities remain, there is going to be a lot of suffering in future, right? So this suffering is also remains as a possibility or potency. We're not talking about these. These are anagata dhammas. We're talking about the possibilities here. But still, as they are, this possibility is what is going to happen. There is a sort of a Dhamma nature within them. Why we call them? We are not freed from this suffering. That's how we call it. Even at this location, if this is the place we are living at the moment, this is the place. Even at this place, we are not freed from this suffering. There's a possibility. It's going to happen. It's a law. But we can say we are not freed from this suffering as a possibility. So therefore, these Upadino Dhamma, Anupanna Dhamma also manifest Dhamma attributes. They also manifest Dhamma attributes. So that's why they came into this chart. If it was a Dhammatā only, they would be taken out from the chart. But you can see the difference. Paramattha Jatikas are closer to Dhamma, but still they are explained as Dhammatas. These two are closer to Dhammatas, but they also manifest characteristics of Dhammas. That's why I shifted these two to bring them together, Upadino Dhamma and Anupanna Dhamma. If you are not familiar, or if you have forgotten the meanings, while we can re-watch the video. So before that, I advise please go and have a look, or have the knowledge renewed about these names. For some, they can be completely new, or you may have forgotten their meanings. First, we have to understand what is a Paramattha Jatika, what is an Upadino Dhamma, and what is Anupanna Dhamma. I have given few lectures on these topics, and also a lecture collectively talking about them. 2 lectures, right? So this is how we distinguish this chart, the left side of this chart, into Dhamma and Dhammatas. Now we move into the Asankata Paramattas. Asankata Paramattha means the unconditioned realities. The characteristic of unconditioned realities, according to the Theravāda tradition, is the relief from the suffering that is going to happen. In terms of not conditioned by causes, even Ajatakasa, the ultimate, the infinite space, according to Theravadians, is not conditioned. Is not conditioned. Because it's not like the Big Bang theory according to Theravada tradition. They are talking about infinite space that has no limit, or that has no beginning or no end. It is an empty space where the realities are located. So in terms of conditioned nature, Ajatakasa, it does exist, this empty space. We can call it as something that doesn't have any beginning. But what is the difference of this asankata? It's not conditioned. At the same time, it is the freedom from the suffering that is going to happen. Ajatakasa doesn't have that characteristic. So that's why we didn't place it here. I think we discussed about this topic in detail. What is Ajatakasa and what is time in a separate lecture. So therefore, this is the relief from the suffering that is going to happen. It's a relief. It's a state. It's a completely separate state. It may be felt as a Dhammatā to some when you're talking about the relief from the suffering. But according to the Buddha's teachings, he has emphasized on this matter that it is a Dhamma. It is a Dhamma. So therefore, we categorize all of them, all these five, whatever unconditioned state related to nirvana are Dhammas. I think I have explained each and every nirvana. Sammuti nirvana is the relief from the suffering, like worldly sufferings, the sickness, the troubles, or sometimes mental suffering, defilements, and so forth. Tadanga nibbana is the relief from the defilements. Vikamana nirvana is the relief from the defilements by suppressing it very deeply. Samucceda nibbana is the relief from the defilements, completely eradicating the defilements, the relief of freedom from it. And Nisara nibbana is the freedom from all the conditioned realities. They are all Dhammas. Now, then we go into the in-between chart. In-between chart. Out of the 10 Anippanna Rupas, right? 10 Anippanna Rupas, if you have the handouts that I have distributed before, among the 10 Anippanna Rupas, we have one is the Paricheda Rupa. Paricheda Rupa is the space between two material clusters, or either the edge of a material cluster. We are talking about, we'll just focus on the space in between. So actually there was an unlimited space already. So when Rupa Kalapas appear in this space, they arise with some space in between. So that space, which had already been existing, is the Akasa Dhatu, we call Akasa Dhatu. So out of the 10 Anippanna Rupas, Akasa Dhatu should come here, right? Akasa Dhatu should come under this. So Ajata Akasa, we have the in Ananta Akasa, we call unlimited space. Ananta Akasa, I think it's too small to be observed, I think. So I'll erase this kala first. Ananta Akasa is the unlimited space. Which I talked about Ajata Akasa. But in that unlimited space, when two Rupa Kalapas appear, there is a tiny space between. That is called Paricheda Akasa. Paricheda Akasa, the gap between two Rupa Kalapas. So then this would turn into 9, because one of them are brought here. Then among the 10 Anippanna Rupas, the last 4, Upachaya, Santati, Jarata, Aniccata, the last 4, we call Upachaya is the arising of a Rupa generation, the initial arising of a Rupa. Santati is the, while they are happening in generations, the subsequent arising of Rupa. Jarata is the decaying of a Rupa. Aniccata is the passing away of a Rupa. They are the Anicca Lakkana of Rupas. We are not talking about Namas there. So out of the 10 Anippanna Rupas, we have discussed on this, 10 Anippanna Rupas, one is the space between two Kalapas, and the last 4 are the characteristics, universal characteristics of Rupas. But actually we are talking about the Anicca Lakkana only. So they were called 4 Lakkana Rupas. 4 Lakkana Rupas. These Lakkana Rupas fall under Tilakkana. But it doesn't mean that all Tilakkana is Lakkana Rupas. Tilakkana is Anicca Lakkana, Dukkha Lakkana, and Anatta Lakkana. Among them, we have the 4 Lakkana Rupas as well. Right? 4 Lakkana Rupas. Then we reduce another 4. So it became 5. 1 was deducted and 4 was deducted. So then we have only 5 left. Those 5 are Lahuta, Mudita, Kamanyata. That is the lightness of great elements. Mudita, the softness of great elements. Kamanyata, the adaptability of great elements. Then we had 2 Vinyatis. These are all modifications of great elements while we do physical acts and verbal acts. So they are all slight changes that happens within the 4 great realities, 4 great materiality, Mahabhuta. So these 5, we collectively call them Vikara Rupas, these 5. The term Vikara Rupa can be said to Lahuta, Mudita, Kamanyata separately. At the same time, all the 5, including Vinyati and the 3 Lahuta, Mudita, Kamanyata, all 5 can be called Vikara Rupa. So I'll change the chart here now. 5 Vikara Rupa we call. 5 Vikara Rupa. So in the Tilakkana, we have 4, including we have Anicca Lakkana, Dukkha Lakkana, Anatta Lakkana. Inside the Anicca Lakkana, we have 4 Lakkana Rupas. We call it Tilakkana, including 4 Lakkana. Including 4 Lakkana Rupa. I'll just make it as something like this, right? But it doesn't say here Ajatakasa means the infinite phase and the space between 2 kalapas. Here, so it completely covers the entire thing. But here we are talking about 4 Lakkana Rupas related to Rupa only. We are not talking about the entire Tilakkana, right? Then Kala, which was put here, would go into the Panyati. So now we are going to categorize them, this group. 5 Lakkana Rupas. 5 Lakkana Rupas are, some are modifications of the 4 great elements, some are sub-characteristics of the 4 great elements. The lightness of the 4 great elements, the softness of the 4 great elements, the adaptability of the 4 great elements, a modification of 4 great elements while we talk and work. So they are we can call them sub-characteristics like of 4 great elements. 4 great elements fall here, Paramattha Dhammas. Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayava, Paramattha Dhammas. So they are sub-characteristics of Dhammas. So we cannot call them exact Dhammas because Dhamma has a specific reality. As a reality, it has a specific definition. So we have to call them, they are in the Dhammas, but not completely a Dhamma, right? So they are partially Dhammas. They are partially Dhammas. So, for example, they are partially. It means they cannot be called Dhammatā, right? They are close to Dhammas. They are parts of Dhammas, not exactly Dhammas. Okay? They are sub-characteristics of Dhammas. But they should not be misunderstood with the secondary characteristics. Like, for example, Lobha has the main characteristic of getting attached. At the same time, it has a sub-characteristic of following the mind stream or bounding the beings to the samsara. We can call them secondary characteristics. But here we are talking, it's the hardness is there, and it becomes, there is a certain modification within the hardness, so it becomes quite softer or it becomes quite lighter and so forth. It's some kind of a effect happened to the 4 great elements. Then Lakkana, Tilakkana, we talked about this in a complete lecture. Tilakkana are the 3 universal characteristics. They are phenomenon. They are phenomenon. Reality has a certain body, is an entity, it has an independent existence. The nature of a reality to arise and pass away. The nature of a reality to depend on others. The nature of reality in bringing suffering. These are called tilakkana. So tilakkanas are related to the realities. At the same time, we call the realities undergo this phenomenon. We can explain it various ways. Tilakkana are related to the realities. Realities have these characteristics. At the same time, there is a phenomenon called anicca, dukkha, anatta lakkanas, where the realities undergo. These realities are not affected by anicca and dukkha. It has the characteristic of anatta, a partial anatta, but these realities are completely undergoes this anicca, dukkha, anatta. So tilakkana is not a reality, it's a phenomenon. Including the 4 lakkanas, they are phenomenon. So they are Dhammatā. They are Dhammatā. They are Dhammatā. Then we come into ekacca pacce sati. Sorry. Ekacca pacce sati. Certain conditional forces. I think we discussed here 3 types of conditional forces. The conditional anantara pacce sati, the momentum left behind by the previous mind moment, previous consciousness or previous cluster of mentalities, the momentum which remains, which causes the arising of another mental cluster. So that momentum is connected to the Dhammas, the mentalities. They are closer, they are connected to the Dhammas. But at the same time, they support the arising of another mental cluster. Right? They are closer to Dhammas. Because likewise, now these were the sub-characteristics of Dhammas. Likewise, these are the Paccaya forces, the abilities of Dhammas. They are abilities of Dhammas. So they are also closer to realities. But we cannot equalize them with Dhammas. They are certain abilities within the Dhamma, related to Dhamma. And those certain attributes, these Paccaya forces, the few Paccaya forces that we discussed, remain even can exist even after the Dhamma has passed away. So therefore, they are closer to Dhamma, but they are not the Dhamma. The ability of the mental cluster is a Dhamma. The momentum which remains from this mental cluster, the momentum of this cluster, momentum like force, we call it. Momentum like force which remains is not a Dhamma, but it is an attribute of the Dhamma. So they are very close to the Dhammas, like the Lakkana Rupas, Vikara Rupas, like the Vikara Rupas. Right? Like the Vikara Rupas. Like the Vikara Rupas. So they are closer to Dhammas. Right? They are closer to Dhammas. But at the same time, when we now, a certain force remains within the mind stream, if we have done good deeds, we are not talking about the karma force, a certain force remains within the mind stream, a habitual impact, which causes the similar mentalities to arise later on. So therefore, it remains as a certain force. So it's a Dhamma actually. It is a Dhamma, but we cannot, the literature doesn't identify it as a Dhamma, because then otherwise what happens? The Paccaya force is a different reality. The Paccaya is a different reality, the force and the reality. So what we call it, we connect it to this reality. And we call it it is one kind of a attribute of the reality, something which is related to the reality, but not the reality itself. So that's why we make it closer to the Dhammas. In the same way, when a good deed has been done, its habitual impact would remain in the mind stream, and it causes the arising of some other similar good qualities. That's why a person who has given dana tends to give dana again and again. A person who has compassion towards the beings, seeing a being in the suffering, compassion naturally arises to him. And it causes this happening. It causes the arising of this. At the same time, when you're talking about Paccaya forces, we explain it in various ways. What is the ability of the condition and how the condition supports. According to Theravāda literature, when we talk about the Paccaya Sati, the Paccaya force, it's not a very clear-cut explanation. Sometimes it is the ability. Sometimes it is how the condition supports the effect. So therefore, in the literature, it also has the attributes of, it also has been explained closer to a Dhammatā. Closer to a Dhammatā. Right? It's closer to a Dhammatā. So it's very difficult to distinguish whether it's a Dhamma or a Dhammatā. We have both the explanations. We have both the explanations. Right? So you can see here, they are actually closer, much closer to Dhammatas. But they also manifest Dhamma attributes. Here, it's very difficult to explain, though they have been explained in both the ways. Gati. We were talking about a state which determines certain peculiar characteristics of beings who are born in specific realms. Every human who is born as a human share certain common attributes. Animals share common attributes. Deva in specific realms share common attributes. The Devas in Tusita realm are called happier over other beings, other Devas. And Devas in the Nimmana Rati can create the figures that as they like while enjoying sensual pleasures. So they all possess this ability just because they are born there. So what did it determine? What did it suggested us? We could postulate that there is a certain state due to which beings possess certain mental and physical attributes and capacities. I think we did a complete lecture on this. So, and we also mentioned it as a certain state, an ultimate state. At the same time, we also discussed about it. It can be explained as a phenomenon, by which, due to which the beings possess these attributes, mental and physical attributes and capacities. So it can be explained in both the ways. It can be explained either as a Dhamma or a Dhammatā. Either as a Dhamma or a Dhammatā. How we explain it in the literature. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I equalize Dhamma and Dhammatā. That is how it has been explained. It has the attributes of a Dhamma, and it also can be explained as a Dhammatā. Then Ajatakasa is this free space, empty space in which the realities could exist. So when two Rupa Kalapas appear in this space, that the original space was called a Paricheda Akasa. So it doesn't have, so it's included in the Ajatakasa. Why did I write it here? Because we can find it in the Nippana Rupas. Even we exclude this, it's not a problem. So therefore, then this Ajatakasa should be considered as a Dhamma, as I understand. It's a Dhamma, though it has not been explained as a separate reality in the Theravāda tradition. In some schools, in some Buddhist schools, they call it as Asankata Dhamma. So it's obviously a Dhamma. It has the attributes of a Dhamma because we can verify its existence. That's why when we reduce the volume of the space with the same amount of matter, the pressure increases. The same amount of air in a certain space put forth a certain amount of pressure into its surface, and if you reduce the space, the pressure would increase. So it shows that there is something called space, and it has an effect. So therefore, space is a Dhamma, though in the Theravāda tradition we have not listed it as an ultimate reality. Kala is a Panyati, so we don't need to worry about that. Next week I'm going to talk about what a concept is. So this is how I personally distribute the idea of Dhamma and Dhammatā in this chart of ultimacy. So we can see. So that's why in today's present day teaching, we are talking mostly about Dhammas. So that's why when you study the Abhidhammatta Sangaha, we study only the Paramattha Dhammas, Chitta, Chetasika and Rupa, Nama and Rupa and Nirvana. That's what we study because they are pure Dhammas. Why don't we study about them in the beginning? Because it's very difficult to distinguish whether it's a complete Dhamma. So it has a Dhamma attribute. At the same time, they can be explained as Dhammatas. It can lead to confusion. Maybe that's what the reason was. And if you look into the Vikara Rupas, right? Vikara Rupas. But since they have been explained under the 28 Rupas, we study them. But the Vikara Rupas are attributes of Dhammas, not pure Dhammas. 4 Lakkanas are Dhammatā, Ajatakasa is a Dhamma actually, right? So since these 10 Rupas, 5, 4 and 1 were written as 28 Rupas, so we study about them. Otherwise, they are not real exact Dhammas, right? So then we can see all these. Now, Tilakkana is a Dhammatā. Certain Paccaya forces are either closer to Dhamma or Dhammatas, Gati and so forth. Can be explained as a separate state, or it can be explained as a phenomenon. There have been no clear explanations on them. And Ajatakasa, though is a Dhamma, since it's the empty space, it has not been discussed, right? So that's why our entire focus in present day studies is focused to these few groups. We tend to ignore them in the beginning. Maybe that is because it's quite difficult to explain for a beginner. But my argument means my thought is that we have to give a clear picture to the students, the ones who study from the beginning. So now we can locate them where they are. Now, after we have done this course of the ultimacy, so when we go into the studies of Dhamma, maybe the sutras or the Abhidharma, or whatever in the Theravāda literature, we'll be able to locate them exactly. Because we see in some sutras, Buddha has discussed. Now, when he talked about the lobha in the Mahamalukya Sutta, he was talking about the Paramattha Dhatika lobha. In the Nakasika Sutta, when he was talking about the suffering, he was talking about the Anuppanna dukkha, which is closer to a Dhammatā at the same time, which manifests Dhamma attributes. When he was talking in the Pottapada Sutta, he was talking about Upadino Dhammas. In most of the suttas, he's talking about the Paramattha Dhammas. And when he talk about the Nirvana in specific suttas, we have specific various types of Nirvana. So likewise, when we have this holistic picture about the Paramatthas, we'll be able to locate what is the sutta specifically mentioning according to the Theravāda tradition. This is completely according to Theravāda tradition. Some other traditions have different explanations. Like there are Chitta Vipayutta Dhammas in the Sarvastivādi traditions. They have their own explanations about them. So it's also a very nice kind of a literature that has a lot of arguments and so forth. But this is the Theravādian approach. Yeah. So my today's lecture, I will conclude the lecture. Next week, I'm going into this arena, the Paññattis. Right? It's a completely separate arena. So here, now we have finished the ultimacy. We have completed the ultimacy within, I think, nearly 27 lectures. We have taken 27 lectures to complete our chart. And also we did about Dhammatas and Dhammas, and we are able to locate them. But which part belongs to Dhamma and which part belongs to Dhammatā. And there was a slight change in this group. Earlier it was 10 Anippanna Rupas. Out of 10, 4 went into the Tilakkana and 1 into the Ajatakasa. So there remained 5, and the name changed into Vikara Rupas. 5 Vikara Rupas. So this will be the lecture, and I'll open the forum for the Q&A discussion.
Thank you, Bhante. Saru. So hello everyone. If you have any question, you can raise your hand, or you can put the question in the chat box, and we can read it out for you.
I think there was a question at the end, right? Last week, was it?
Yes, but that person said that they would like to ask that question if the opportunity is
given
later.
Okay.
So they are going to ask by themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll take the questions related to this topic first, and at the end we'll give him a chance.
Right, Bhante. I have a question. It's not quite a question, but it's just that. So Bhante, so how should we define the word Dhammatā exactly, Bhante? Because after this lecture, I'm not quite sure I understand what the Dhammatā means. Then is it a law or is it the possibility? Because when you say that the Upadino Dhamma is, we can categorize it as the Dhammatā. Then is it like a law? But it should be the possibility, right?
Right. So thing is, now within the literature, there is, like, when we talk about the niyamas and all these, in some places we talk it as a law. When we explain about, it's a very good question. When we in the last lecture, we talked about we define it as the law. But in this literature, I would have talked about this in that lecture actually. In some places, they talk it, they include it into the niyama, into the possibilities as well. For example, some teachers say this anupanna dhamma, the suffering that is going to happen, is a anyatara dhamma niyama dhatu. It's dhamma niyama. So then we have to define what the Dhammatā is. So actually, the original explanation of Dhammatā is the law, as you said. But within the literature, some erudite scholars have suggested that the possibilities are also included, can be included in Dhammatas. Because why it is a possibility? Because there is a law. How can we exactly say there is such a possibility? Because there is a law that they are going to happen. So therefore, it's not when we say a possibility, it's not exactly a Dhammatā, I would call. It's not exactly a Dhammatā. But it has been explained as a Dhammatā within the literature. So therefore, that's why I named it as Dhammatā. As your question is it makes sense, because we define the Dhammatā as a law, but we have to keep in mind even the possibilities has been addressed as Dhammatas by some erudite scholars.
I see. Thank you.
So when we say Dhammatā, it's not only law. Mainly it's the law. Even the possibilities has been explained like that. I think my personal understanding is why they call it a Dhammatā. A possibility, how can we predict about a possibility? Because there is a law. So it's closer to a law. So sometimes they call it the anupanna suffering is a anyatara dhamma niyama dhatu, they call it. But it also has the attributes of Dhamma. So it's very difficult to exactly clear-cut say which and which is this. So even if you draw it in a broken light, the Upadino Dhamma and Anupanna Dhamma, the green color, still it makes sense. It makes sense. Rather than saying it a Dhammatā, actually.
I see. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. So yeah, hello everyone. If you have any question, you can raise your hand or you can put the question in the chat box. So Bhante, so the other question I have is that in the previous lecture we mentioned the 5 Dhammatā, right? So in this charts right here you give, then whatever item that we put in the Dhammatā, then it looks like all of them except the Kamma in the Paramattha Jatika. Then the rest should be put in the Dhammaniyama, right, Bhante?
Yes, exactly. Upadino Dhamma also closer to Kamma niyama, right?
Right. Yes.
Anupanna Dhammas, they are Dhamma niyama. Exactly. Remaining are Dhamma niyama. But actually, here we should have Uttu niyama. It's not all Dhammatā are represented here. Sorry for that. Bija niyama. Then we have Chitta niyama. Kamma niyama. Dhamma niyama. Sorry. That also should be explained because not all Utu niyama has been explained. Sorry.
Right. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Sayale Punya.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning, Sally.
This question is related to last lecture. So
Okay.
you also mentioned about the yoni niyama. So that yoni niyama is that what we say the 4 kinds of yoni.
Yes, 4 kinds of yoni, at the same time 5 types of gati, whatever we can include. Gati niyama, yoni niyama, we can call any.
So
name.
they
were
all
talking to the 4 types of yoni. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And
birth. 4 types of birth, modes of birth. Yeah.
Okay. So another question is come from one Chinese participant. So when you said when we practice vipassana, you said if someone claims vipassana practice just focus on the present moment, that statement is not correct. So he said this explanation is like you see some CROs or some materials. They said when the practitioner reach to the Pacaya Parikahanyana, so they are called the Juna Sodapanna. So is it same like that one?
Chula Sotapanna is like if you reach the Pacaya Parigahanyana, if you read not the Pacaya Parigahanyana, if you complete the Pacaya Parigahanyana, if you complete the Pacaya Parigahanyana, you come into the state of Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi. Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi and Pacaya Parigahanyana are 2 things. You complete the Pacaya Parigahanyana to attain the Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi. You do the Namarupa Paricheda Jnana, then you attain the Ditti Visuddhi. So when he has completed the Pacaya Parigahanyana and attained the Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi, then he is a Chula Sotapanna. Why is that he is a Chula Sotapanna? He is similar to a Sotapanna. A Sotapanna has completely eradicated Ditti and Vichikicha, wrong view and skeptical doubt. So this person who has attained the Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi has suppressed the wrong view and the skeptical doubt, Ditti and Vichikicha. So it's similar to a Sotapanna. So, but still he has not completely eradicated. So we call him Chula Sotapanna. A small Sotapanna, who is similar to a Sotapanna, we can call. Then that one is with your attainment, you become certain in the next destination. It says if you remain as Chula Sotapanna, you are certain to be born in a good realm if you don't lose that level. Then what I was talking about last week was you can do present moment vipassana. There's no problem in that. What I was saying is if someone says a statement that vipassana has to be exclusively on present moment, there cannot be any other type of vipassana. What I said was that statement is wrong. I didn't say that you cannot do vipassana in the present moment. You can do it, obviously. Actually, the present moment means you cannot do present moment vipassana on nama dhammas because the chitta itself cannot know the chitta, right? If you are doing a nama vipassana, it has to be previous chitta, or either you have to contemplate on another bahida aramana only. And rupa also, when you see a rupa, the viti goes. There cannot be a vipassana wisdom in the 5 panchadvarika viti, 5 sense door mental process, mind process. It has to be from a mind door process. So it also contemplates about a past aramana. In some cases, really directly to mind door, you can really means some in most cases directly you can focus on the rupa of the body at the present moment and do the contemplation. So there are few occasions that the present vipassana can occur. But what we normally do is you see your object, you contemplate it as anicca dukkha anatta, and you mostly they contemplate it as a rupa, and the understanding starts to pop up if you feel the impermanent, suffering and non-selfness. So even in such contemplation, it's not a present moment vipassana according to Abhidhamma, because when you see your object, the Fido Viti goes, Ido Viti, then with the mind we contemplate on the past object. So there is nothing called exact present moment vipassana actually. What people are doing is also a slightly past vipassana, past moment vipassana. So, but I understand when someone says you have to contemplate on the spot when you see something, when you hear something, when you feel something, when a thought arises. Otherwise, you cannot do, you can never do your own internal akusala vipassana chitta, because after it has arisen, you have to do with another chitta. In a mentally, internal mental vipassana can never be present moment, right? So when I said, I was talking that if someone's technically, it's wrong if you say you are doing present moment vipassana, except in few cases. So therefore, if someone says that you have to do it in that way only then the vipassana wisdom arises. That is completely against the Theravada teaching. There's ample of evidences. There is no evidence to prove that vipassana has to be done on the spot, on the objects. I can guarantee that there's no evidence for that. You cannot prove it with the vipassana in that way. Mahasi Sayadaw has tried it to prove actually to be true. He has ignored lots of information given in the literature. He says the sammasana jnana, which has been explained in the Visuddhi Magga, is not a deliberate contemplation. When you keep on focusing on the objects that arrive at you, the sammasana jnana has to come automatically. That was his explanation in the Burmese book. It contradicts with the explanation. It doesn't mean that when you focus on the present moment objects, it doesn't deny that. It doesn't say that it is not a vipassana. It is indeed a vipassana, what the Mahasi Sayadaw has said. But the thing is, if you generalize it as it is the only way to do vipassana, that is an utterly wrong statement. So that's what my idea was. It's not denying the present moment vipassana. What I'm saying is, you cannot say vipassana has to be present moment. Some would say, what about the udayavve jnana? Paccuppannanan dhammanam udayavvyanupassane panya vipassane jnana. Udayavvyanupassane jnana. So this paccuppanna has to be explained, because if you go to sammasana jnana, we have atita anagata paccuppannanan dhammana, sankipitva vavattane panya sammasane jnana, past, present, future. So first we have to define what is past, present, future according to sammasana jnana. Sammasana jnana says present is not the present moment that we are focusing on. First, you have to define. Now, even we focus on the breakfast, the Rama Rupa, while we had our breakfast today, when we are focusing on that, we have to classify it or define it as a present. Present means you take a certain object in Sammasana, that is a present object. Then, whatever Nama Rupa which happened before eating is past. Whatever Nama Rupa that happens after eating is future. According to that contemplation, if I focus on the eating, and then think about this afterwards, even the present moment is a future object. So therefore, whenever we come to the vipassana explanations in the meditations, I'll clearly explain how the present, past, and future has been explained in the Patisambhida Magga and also within the Theravada literature. So based on that, what I said was, what I say is, we cannot generalize and say that because of a technique that vipassana has to be exclusively present moment. No, it can be either present object or past object or a future object or even a phenomenal object. Phenomenal. What is a phenomenal object? If you go into Visuddhi Magga, we can contemplate about this. The Nama Rupas of the 60s would not go into 70s. The Nama Rupas of 70s would not go into 80s. We have to do it even as a young yogi. That's how it has been instructed. So what happens is we don't know whether it's not a future object actually. We don't know how long we are going to live even. Now the decades, the Nama Rupas of the 90s would not move into the hundreds or go into the next life. We don't know whether we live 100 years or not. So it's a phenomenal object. It's an idea of ultimate reality. So that's why I said in Vipassana we can have either past object, present object, or future object. It's a phenomenal object. So therefore, confining vipassana only to the present object, present moment, it's a distortion of the Theravada tradition. Theravada tradition is very clear about it. There's ample of evidences to show that there is no such a present moment. It has never been explained as a present moment vipassana. And if you go in the commentary of the Digha Nikaya, Samanyapala Sutra, one of the ancient arahants recognized by the commentaries as an arahant, Mahasiva Sayadaw, who had, the story says he had disciples, 30,000 disciples who became arahants. And he was urged by one disciple to go and meditate. He was a very good scholar. and he became an arahant at the age of 90. So his instructions were, when you are doing meditation while walking, you can either focus on your rupa, nama rupa while walking and see the impermanent suffering and non-selfness, or either you do the walking with the samatha kammatana and then stop at the edge of the chankamana and do the contemplation about your walking, and how the Lady Sayadaw has explained in Paramattha Deepani. When you want to see the impermanent suffering and non-selfness of the four great elements, either you do it while walking or you imagine how you walk and then try to understand how it changes. So someone can ask, is vipassana is an imagination? Is vipassana is an imagination? Someone can ask a question. So that question, there is no way to say that that kind of a contemplation is not a vipassana, because if someone argues that is not a vipassana, then the question comes, on which base you can say that is not a vipassana? Because today, most of the people have fabricated or brought the idea by themselves, listen to certain explanations, present day explanations, that vipassana has to be exclusively present, and it has to be, you have to see the reality as it is at the present moment. This is a complete addition to the teachings done by certain masters. So therefore, if someone raises a question, that question is not based on the literature, it's based on some Dhamma talks that we have listened. It's not based on the literature. Literature doesn't have any support to say that if you imagine about your rupa and contemplate, it's not vipassana. There's no such a basis for that. So then someone can ask, is it ultimate reality? Yes, it is the ultimate object. It's a phenomenal object. That is, all these happens after we have understood what the realities are. The key is the nama rupa paricheda. Nama rupa pariggaha is the key. We have to understand the characteristics of patavi, apo, tejo, vayo, mind and matter, mentalities, chitta, chetasikas. Then after we have understood it, when we contemplate on it, you can use the word thinking, it's no problem. But thinking means we understand what the hardness is, what the cohesion is, what the consciousness is, and then we start to consider how it arises and passes away. That's why I mentioned Buddha has never said, Buddha has said, go under a tree and contemplate. Rukkamula gatova, sunyagara gatova, itipati sanchittati. Rupang anatta, vedana, we say chakkung anatta, rupang anatta, sotang anatta, ganang anatta, vedana, and all this. So when we contemplate about jivha, when we contemplate about jivha vijnana, for instance, in different suttas, it's not necessary that you have to have food in your mouth to contemplate the jivha vijnana. Why is that? It doesn't need to be a present moment experience. So that's why I said, not denying the present moment vipassana, saying that if someone says it's exclusive to present moment, it doesn't have any basis to support.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. So his another question is, when Bhante talk about the Dhammatā, so if it is like the Paticca Samuppada and the Patthana.
Paticca Samuppada is a Dhammatā actually. Paticca Samuppada itself is a Dhammatā. There is an argument about this within the tradition. Some say the word Paticca Samuppada refers to the reality, the cause. That is how Venerable Buddhaghosa has explained it. But there is another opinion of teachers that Paticca Samuppada itself is the phenomenon. Dhammatā, Dhamma niyamata, Dhamma titita, Dhamma niyamata. The Pali words are very clear. So whenever Lady Sayadaw is strongly refuting the idea of Visuddhimagga and saying it's a Dhammatā actually. Both the Buddhaghosa and Lady Sayadaw, Venerable Buddhaghosa and Lady Sayadaw, both agree on that they are Dhammatas. The happening is a Dhammatā. But the word Paticca Samuppada, there is an argument. How do we define it? So Paticca Samuppada, the happening of Paticca Samuppada is a Dhammatā. Is a Dhammatā. Patthana, the happening of Patthana is also a Dhammatā. They all belong to the Dhamma niyama.
What I understood, you said like when we see avijja is a Dhamma.
Avijja
right?
is Dhamma.
Yeah.
Sankhara is Dhamma.
Yeah, but the happening of the avijja and sankhara is a Dhammatā.
Exactly. Happening of sankhara due to avijja is a dhammata. Avijja is a dhamma, sankhara is a dhamma. Happening of avijja due to happening of sankhara due to avijja is a dhammata.
So if we come the 24 pajayas, like hetu pajaya, hetu is the
Dhamma.
dhamma, and associated with those associated with phenomena, cetasikas, they are happening are the dhammata.
Yeah, they are associating chitta cetesika also dhamma, hetu also dhamma. They are happening is dhammata. Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Bhante.
And also, some says the support given by hetu to associated mentalities. That pache sati. Pache sati, what it is? Pache sati is attribute of dhamma, and also it has been explained as a dhammata, how it supports. So these both have been given by the teachers. Hey, pache sati is not exactly dhamma, it is something belonging to the dhamma. And that's why I say pache sati is the ability of the dhamma. At the same time, how the pacha helps the paccayuppanna. So this is related to the happening, the law, related to the law, and it's also happening. So therefore, it's also has been explained as a dhammata. So the pache sati, according to Lady Sayadaw, is a dhammata. At the same time, they recognize is a part of the dhamma. So that's why we have to categorize it as dhamma and dhammata both.
Okay.
As not exactly dhamma, part of dhamma, attribute of dhamma, and also dhammata. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Oh, thank you,
Dr.
Bhante.
Ryan, we'll give the shall we give the opportunity to the last week question that someone?
Yeah, as I reported, Bhante, that person wanted to have their own opportunity.
Ask.
Whenever they want to ask, they are going to ask Bhante.
Okay.
So we are not going to
Okay.
call their name, Bhante.
Okay, right. Okay,
Yes,
right.
yes,
Okay.
Bhante.
If they are present, they can ask the question.
Yes, yes, Bhante. So I have a question related to this, Bhante. So this question is about the ability to read others' minds. It's abenya. So it should be a manodwara viti, right, Bhante? So
Exactly.
what is the object of that manodwara viti, Bhante? Is it the present object?
This is also a very controversial point in the Theravāda tradition. So thing is now, if it is the now according to the traditional explanation, like what has been followed in the commentaries, what has been touched by the bhavanga, what has affected the bhavanga, has to be the object of the entire viti, right?
Right.
So if any chitta is connected to bhavanga, we call apata gacchati. If it touches the bhavanga, strikes at the bhavanga, that same object has to be known by manodwara vajana, and then the same chitta has to be known by javana. Then it happens a past object, right? Right. It happens to be a past object. Then it's a big problem. It means that no way in the parachitta vijnana can know a present object, right? But there are explanations on it can know the present object. So the commentary says this presentness is not the kanika presentness. It's the santati paccuppanna or adha paccuppanna. So Mula Tika completely rejects this idea and says there is no santati paccuppanna or kanika paccuppanna in Dhamma Sangha. We are talking about momentary present. If it were talking about the santati present, generation present, or the lifespan present, what happens is in the Pachuppanna Tika, Atita Tika, one has to say Pachuppanno Dhammo, Pachuppannasa Dhammasa, Anantara Pachena Pachayo. Because in a one stream of santati, previous consciousness and the following consciousness both have to be present there. Then the present consciousness support the present consciousness. If we take present, past, future in terms of generations. So Mula Tika refutes this idea and say no, it's only in Dhamma Sangani in Patana. Present means momentary present. So it is mentioned clearly that Parachitta Vijnana Abhinya can know the present chitta. So it has to be present moment consciousness. So how they bring this, how they explain it, even whenever Lady Sayadaw, the answer of this, there's a lot of explanations going on this, very detailed. The core essence of this, if you specifically think about a specific chitta that he has at the moment, or while he's thinking about something, specifically focus on a one chitta, then that chitta may strike at the bhavanga, and it has to be a past object known by the mind stream. But if we consider if you want to know what he is thinking, what sort of a chitta he has, at that time, the present chitta strikes at the bhavanga, then the present chitta is known through the avajjana, then the present chitta is known through separate javanas. So then it's known through the javanas. So what is Lady Sayadaw saying? Doesn't it contradict that the same viti have various objects? So according to Mula Tika and the Lady Sayadaw both, as the contemplation avajjana was done as a chitta, not specifically pointing at a specific chitta. It was done about the chitta in general. Whether it knows the exact chitta or a different chitta, whatever chitta is known, the object, it is not breaking the rule of the chitta vitis. Like you have the object of chitta. It doesn't need to be the exact chitta through the entire process. So they are bringing a new rule. They are changing the rule and explaining it in a different way. Previously the tradition held the idea. If it was a mind process, it has to be the same consciousness or same object. So now what Lady Sayadaw and Mula Tika is suggesting, as long as we have the general idea of a consciousness, what happens is, it can be applied to Rupa also. If the general idea of consciousness, as long as it is knowing a consciousness, even though it's not the moment and the same thing, still it is possible to happen. So therefore, according to them, the Parachitta Vijanana consciousness can know the exact present chitta.
Very interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we have a question from the audience. So the question is, who came up with the numbers 98, 121 jittas, 52 mental factors, and so on? And why is the quantity important?
One thing is, it is important for our studies. Otherwise, it's very difficult. For example, if we study chemistry and so forth, we have to remember the periodic table, and also we have to remember the elements. Otherwise, it's difficult for us to go and give a lecture or a continuous studies. And when did these numbers come? That is, I'm unable to explain. According to the tradition, it came from the Buddha itself. According to some scholars, it was developed later. So it's and whether the numbers were exactly as we discuss in the Dhammasangani, no, the Dhammasangani have a different type of numbers. Having gathered the information which was given in the Dhammasangani, they have made the list. So the 89 and 121 is not what you find in Dhammasangani. It's what you find having thoroughly studied the Dhammasangani. They have found that only 89, that is the lowest way that all the chittas could be included to the lowest number. So that's how this categorization has happened. Otherwise, you can see a different number based on how you categorize them. But it is very clear, the Buddha has clearly mentioned about the chittas, the mental factors, and because there are two types of scholars who ideally take the Abhidhamma, is traditional scholars who take Abhidhamma is coming from the Buddha himself. I'm not going to say my opinion, because it's my personal faith or opinion. It's my personal thing. So I'm just telling what the spectrum is. So traditionally, Theravadians believe that it was uttered by the Buddha and it came from the Buddha himself. And some scholars say that the Buddha gave the matikas, like the basic topics of the Abhidhamma, and it has been discussed while the Buddha was alive. A special good example is the Sangiti Sutra, what the Sariputta has uttered, and the Buddha has praised in the sutta itself that you have to study the Dhamma in this way. So the topics were there and it was developed gradually. That is the idea of some scholars. Some says it came after the first council. It came after the first council. So that's why the Mahasanghikas abandoned it. And some says it came after the second council and it was completed at the third council. So these are the opinions of different scholars. They have their grounds based on the language, based on the comparative studies of the sutras and the Abhidhammas, and also the comparative studies with other sects. So this is how the spectrum goes, whether this is these things come from the Buddha or not from him, whether it's come from him or not. Sorry. So then in this lecture, in this course, I have specifically mentioned that this is a course about the fundamentals of the Theravada. Theravada is a separate sect of the Buddhist spectrum. So in the Buddhist spectrum, there are lots of sects sprung out from the Buddha's disciples. All were disciples of the Buddha. Those Theravadians believe that only the ones who explain the correct Dhamma is Theravadian, and Sarvastivadians explain the Arahants were of their lineage. Then some explain that the Mahinsasakas explain that they sprung forth from the Venerable Purana, the Arahant. Some had a connection with Venerable Ananda, some claim. So all the sects would say that the Arahants were in their side. That's how no one would say they are the Arahants and we are just Putujanas, right? No one would say like that in a historical event. So that is how it has been explained. So I am specifically focusing on the Theravada tradition. So when I am teaching in the Theravada tradition, it has to be, I have to follow how the tradition has explained. So I'm not claiming whether the tradition is correct or wrong. That is not my duty. My duty is to explain how the tradition explains. But I can confidently say one thing. The path to liberation has been explained logically, step by step, within the Theravada tradition. I'm not saying whether it can eradicate defilements or not. I'm not saying that it is the only path or not. What I'm saying is, when you study the Theravada tradition, the Vipassana method, it has a logic. It has been explained very thoroughly, comprehensively, from A to Z. And there are no arguments within the Theravada tradition about it. But the Sarvastivadins also have a Vipassana technique. Vajrayanas also have a Vipassana technique. Vipassana technique, especially for Bodhisattvas, even they have. Even they claim Arahanthood, Vajrayanas. So therefore, every tradition has its own Vipassana. I have not studied other traditions actually, but I have studied this as a Theravadian monk. I have studied the Theravada tradition. I can explain it from A to Z. And so when we A to Z in the entire Vipassana path, not completely from the basics, I can explain. And we can see a very huge logic behind this. So when we are going to have such a course till the end, so there are teaching techniques. It's not easy that we can just say this is how it happens. That's why even we listen to 100 times, we record and listen to the Dhamma talk, we are not going to get enlightened, for sure. That's for sure. Even we listen to the Dhamma talks given by the Buddha, even we record them in their original language or in whatever language, and we keep on listening. I don't think most of us would not get enlightened. Because what is that? Because we haven't had that intellectual or spiritual capacities that we have grown up, that are necessary to be grown up. And someone can say, how about the practice? Yes, the practice also, there are specific ways, the Theravadian practice, the Sarvastivadian practice, the Sutrantika practice. So I'm talking about the Theravadian practice. So the Theravadian practice has specific definitions, the ways of teaching, the ways of understanding. And this is how it has been taught for generations. And this is that it has been taught, practice for generations. It doesn't mean that this is the only, I doesn't claim that this is the only path. I doesn't say this is not the only path even. I'm just saying this is the Theravada path. So sometimes people may argue, is it what the Buddha has said? Yeah, there were some other traditions, there were some other sects. If we go into explain, for example, if we can explain the Buddha's teachings very by our own self, every intellectual person has that right and the capacity to do that. But when we are talking about the Theravada tradition, we have the basic fundamentals. So the number of chittas is a basic fundamental, number of cetasikas is a basic fundamental, How it arises is a basic fundamental. The causality is a basic fundamental. So we are talking about the basic fundamentals of this tradition. So if we explain the Buddha's teachings as we understand it, yes, we can do it. Then what happens is that what we have to accept it. We have to decide whether our explanation falls into the Theravada or not. Because there have been various explanations of the Buddhist teachings. So it doesn't matter how famous the preacher is, whether he falls into Theravada or not. That's the what matters in this. But I don't say Theravada is the only way or is not the way. I don't say it's correct or wrong, but this is Theravada. So if we explain the Buddha's teachings in our own way without following the Theravada fundamentals, we are out of the Theravada. But it's still explanation of the Buddha's teachings, because there have been Sarastivadins which explain the teachings apart from the Theravada. There have been Sautrantikas. There have been the Zen tradition which completely denies the doctrine. Denies completely means completely focuses on the practice. That is the Zen tradition, but it's not the Theravada tradition. So thing is, sometimes the monks, there may be monks who are in the Theravada traditions, but explain breaking the fundamentals of Theravada. Their monkhood doesn't matter. Their monkhood lineage is Theravada, but what they preach have to be evaluated compared to the fundamentals of the Theravada. So we can easily say whether our monk, even he claims to be an Arahant, we can exactly say whether he is an Arahant according to Theravada or not. Whether he's according to Theravada, whether he's Arahant or not. We can very clearly define it because the fundamentals have been clearly explained. So that was the purpose of this course, that to explain what Theravada is. So then what happened? The listeners have the opportunity to decide whether Theravada is a doctrine to be followed or not, whether Theravada makes sense or not, whether it's attractive or not. The listeners have their can make the decision by themselves. So as you said, this is how it has been explained in Theravada tradition, and the numbers does matter when we study the doctrine, because if you want to go deeply into the Theravada tradition, someone can ask the question: can't we study the Theravada tradition without the numbers and all these? Yes, we can, to a limited level, not to the deepest level. It would be quite harder if we go alone without knowing the exact numbers. It doesn't mean that we have to memorize them as they are, but actually at least we have to have a good picture about what they are, because when we come into the lectures of Nama, the mentalities, lots of numbers would be used. But are we going to use these numbers in meditation? No, it's not. We are not going to use it. These studies of numbers is to understand the philosophy deeply. So then only we'll be able to practice according to the Theravada. We can practice according to our own. We can practice according to a different tradition. We can practice according to a certain respected master. What I'm talking is how to practice according to Theravada. Theravada is a unique tradition which has its unique peculiar attributes, which had lasted for thousands of years. So within the tradition, there are lots of developments. Within the tradition, there are lots of additions of the techniques. That's obvious. So, but this is the tradition. So that's why I follow these numbers and all to explain the Theravada tradition.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And there is one more hand, Bhante.
Sure.
Yes, please go ahead, Sayale Uttama.
Bhante.
Yes, okay.
Thank you very much for giving us the panorama of this, like the chart that helps us to have the, there is bird's eye view and worm eye view. This is a very good overview for us to help us to understand the Sutanta and the Abhidhamma and the Vinaya Pitaka. So this is very precious. So thank you so much. My question is regarding today's class. For Paramattha, we have the chart, the Paramattha. There are 4 kind of verification: the Parinya, Pavana, Pahana, Sachikarana, and also so also when you say Achatakasa is a Dhamma because it can be verified, like when we decrease the volume, the pressure increase, something like that. That means it has an effect. So actually my question is, or my questions are, the Dhammatā as a phenomenon also has an effect. So how can we differentiate? And also this kind of 4 picture for verification to identify this is the Paramattha Dhamma or not. And there must be only one kind of picture, or there must be all the 4. That is my second question. Thank you.
Second question, if you have one function, it's enough to call a Dhamma, even one function, right? And the second thing is Dhammatās. The difference of the Dhamma and Dhammatās. Dhammatās can be verified. Dhammas can be verified. Dhammatās, it's difficult to point out what it is. It's difficult to point out what it is. Exactly say, this is it. That's the thing. It's always a mechanism going on. So, but Ajatakasa, we can surely point out, this is it. So that's why the difference of Dhamma and Dhammatā, another difference of Dhamma and Dhammatā. Both can be verified. Both can be verified because Dhammatā can be verified. If avijja is there, Sankara has to arise. So it can be known without wisdom. It can be verified. But it's difficult to point out what it is, exact one thing. Dhamma has to be a one thing to be pointed out. Dhamma is always have an identity of one thing. Yeah. One entity.
So that's why it has the intrinsic quality, right?
Exactly.
So that's why we have to learn, like we have to have Suttamaya Jnana to learn this intrinsic quality to differentiate between Nama, Rupa. So,
exactly.
So this is one of the first step for Vipassana, is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's why when we define the Dhammas, it has its own intrinsic quality. And when we come into the Vipassana method, whatever way we use in the according to Theravāda tradition, we should differentiate. Now, should we differentiate all Chaitasikas from Chittas or all Chaitasikas from each other? Not necessarily. If you can do it, it's a very good thing to understand impermanence, especially the non-selfness. But there is a must that you have to differentiate the intrinsic quality of Rupa from Nama. That is a must in Vipassana. We'll be discussing this when we come to the Vipassana lectures. So there are 2 things. So then there is no one self entity located in here. So as you said, knowing the intrinsic nature is the very basic, that which cannot be reduced any further, is that you have to know Nama and Rupa at least. You don't need to know all the Chitta and Chaitasikas and Rupas. As someone asked the question, the numbers are necessary. For the studies, it is necessary to go deeper. But when you meditate, it is not necessarily that you contemplate all numbers and so forth. What we focus is intrinsic nature. What we focus on the intrinsic function. What we focus on how they are manifested. What we focus is how they arise and pass away. This is our focus in meditation, not the numbers. But numbers are necessary to come into this deeper understanding about its functions, about its intrinsic natures, and so forth. So in meditation, it's a must that we know the intrinsic natures. So these are the basic fundamentals of the Vipassana tradition in Theravāda.
Okay, thank you so much, Bhante.
Yeah. So I'll maybe, because now after this lecture, next week will be Panyati, and then next week will be, after that, there will be a lecture called Ekattanaya and Anattanaya, something that is very necessary to understand these topics. Then our course is finished about the ultimacy. So as an additional thing that how to apply this out of the course, I'll be doing conducting a separate kind of lectures about taking the sutras and how to apply them. How should we know that these sutras can be our Theravādian sutras, because sutras are also distributed in the Sarvastivadins also have their sutras, Mahayanas also has their sutras. I'm talking about the sutras preserved by the Theravāda tradition, which are located in Nikayas, not the Agamas. So in Nikayas, few of the suttas I would take out and explain how should we understand them based on this basic knowledge. That is our purpose. So it will be something out of the course, because the course will end with the Anupanna Ekattanaya and Anattanaya, and also maybe one lecture, which 1 or 2 lectures which collectively talk about them. Then we talk about practically how should we understand the certain sutras based on this, and what is the idea of Theravadians and what is their philosophy beneath these sutras. Like for instance, we would take about the Kaccayana Gotta Sutra, and we would take about some parts of the Patisambhida Marga, and about the Gatha uttered by the Mogaraja. So likewise, how should we locate this? How should we utilize this knowledge to understand the certain sutras? I'll be discussing them as a separate section connected to this course. In that, we would be also discussing briefly about how the Theravadian tradition is located in this huge spectrum in the, of the Buddhist tree.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yes, I think we can
Okay.
wrap it up here, Bhante. I don't see any more questions here,
Right.
Bhante.
Okay, so then thank you very much for listening, and wish you all the best, and may this merit help us to attain the nirvana and also for the prolongation of the Buddha's teachings. Buddha sasanang chirantiktatu, Buddha sasanang chirantiktatu, Buddha sasanang chirantiktatu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante.